Our lesson for today is taken from Daniel in chapter 7. So if you'd like to turn to your Bibles, that's where we'll be reading today. Daniel is a book that is full of dreams. But most of the dreams that we've seen up to this point have been dreamed by other people. Daniel, the interpreter, has been called in to bring out the answers contained in those dreams. Another thing that's going to be different about this chapter, besides who's the one doing the dreaming, is the chronological order has been disrupted. You'll see in our first verse of chapter 7 here that this occurrence happens in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. Our previous chapter, chapter 6, happened during the reign of Darius, Belshazzar's conqueror, the one who came up and slain him, in fact, or at least his forces had. So we're going back in time, at least 2 chapters, to get to chapter 7. But Daniel is going to have a dream here of 4 beasts. To spoil the ending for you here, these 4 beasts do not represent mythical creatures with all these unusual features, but are in fact allegorical or poetic descriptions of nations that the people of God's chosen people would encounter in the coming years. And this imagery, while unusual, striking even, is one that is put into place in this dreamlike way to teach God's people a lesson through Daniel's recording of this dream. Let's begin reading here at the beginning of chapter 7. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was lying on his bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. Daniel said, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me were the 4 winds of heaven, churning up the great sea. 4 great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion, and had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground, so that it stood on 2 feet like a man, and the heart of a man was given to it. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, 'Get up and eat your fill of flesh.' And after that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like a leopard. And on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and was given the authority to rule. And after that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful, and had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and had 10 horns. While I was thinking about the horns, there before me was another horn, a little one, which came up among them, and 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth that spoke boastfully. As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow, the hair of his head was white like wool. His throne was aflaming with fire, and his wheels were all ablaze. The river of fire was flowing, coming up from before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated, and the books were open. And I continued to watch because the boastful words of the horn was speaking. It kept looking until the beast was slain, and his body was destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. The other beasts had been stripped of their authority, but were all allowed to live for a period of time. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, sovereign power. All peoples, nations, and men of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. For us as New Testament Christians, that last little part of what we've read sounds the most familiar. We know who that's about. But the rest of it takes a little bit of interpretation. Daniel's going to give some of that interpretation for us in just the next few moments as we read the rest of the chapter. But I'll give you a little bit of it up front. The 4 beasts are representative of the 4 great ancient, or maybe even ancient into classical empires that rose up and conquered what was the known world at the time. The first one is the one that Daniel is currently in at the time of the rule of Belshazzar. It's the Babylonian Empire. The one that comes up after it, the Persians are next. And then Alexander's Greek Empire, or maybe better to say his Macedonian Empire, is next. And finally the Romans. And the Romans are that beast with the iron teeth that destroys all the others. And because of this symbolism and the linkage to that statue we saw in a few chapters earlier that had those same four kingdoms stacked on top of each other, with the golden feet being King Nebuchadnezzar, we remember. We are seeing a timeline leading directly to one person in particular. During the reign of the Romans, we see the great final king, the one who we recognize from the end of our passage here, Jesus. And he is given, as it says in verse 14, all authority, glory, and sovereign power. All peoples, nations, and men of every language will worship him. His domain is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. Unlike the beasts, which were symbolic, representative, composites of all of these earthly things, there is the presence of the one like a Son of Man here, the very picture of Jesus himself. It should also remind us of something that we saw earlier in this book. There was one like a son of the gods, Nebuchadnezzar said, who entered that furnace and saved Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, if we call them by their Babylonian names. And there are certain people who take very direct interpretation of that to say it was Jesus himself and what we call an appearance of God in the Old Testament, that he manifested and he was the one who in fact rescued those three men. Either way, it's very clear that in this particular moment, in Daniel's vision, Jesus is the one he sees. But listen to Daniel's interpretation and the way he explains it himself. Verse 15, I, Daniel, was troubled in my spirit, and the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. I approached one of those standing there and asked him the true meaning of all this. So he told me and gave me the interpretation of these things. The four great beasts are four kingdoms that will rise from the earth. But the saints of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever, yes, forever and ever. It's interesting, too, here, where the symbolism has changed into the literal interpretation. You'll notice that at the beginning of Daniel's vision, the beasts in verse 2 come out of the sea. And now the man who's interpreting in Daniel's vision, his vision, says they will come out of the earth. Now, this doesn't literally mean they'll rise out of dirt, but out of the world, out of the earth in that sense. The sea in Hebrew symbolism represents the unknown, the uncontrollable, the alien. The sea is where the Philistines came from. The sea is where their enemies come from. The sea is the place you go to die where your body can't be found and you can't be brought and buried properly. So when beasts come up out of the sea, they're coming from a foreign place, the uncontrollable unknown, beyond the scope of individual men, but in the complete control of God himself. Let's continue where I left off in verse 18. But the saints of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever, yes, forever and ever. And then I wanted to know the true meaning of the fourth beast, which was different from all the others and most terrifying, with its iron teeth and bronze claws. The beast that crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. I also wanted to know about the 10 horns on its head, and about the other horn that came up before which 3 of them fell, the horn that looked more imposing than the others, that had eyes and a mouth that spoke boastfully. As I watched, this horn was waging war against the saints and defeating them, until the Ancient of Days came and pronounced judgment in favor of the saints and of the Most High, and the time came that they possessed the kingdom. He gave me this explanation. The fourth beast is a fourth kingdom that will appear on earth. It will be different from all the other kingdoms. It will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom, and after them another king will rise, different from the other earlier ones. He will subdue 3 kings. He will speak against the Most High and oppress the saints and try and change the set times and the laws. And the saints will be handed over to him for a time, times, and half a time. But the court will sit, and his power will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven will be handed over to the saints, the people of the Most High. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him. This is the end of the matter. I, Daniel, was deeply troubled by my thoughts, and my face turned pale, and I kept the matter to myself. It's interesting that Daniel's response is one of sort of despair and of not a lot of hope for the future of the world. Because as Christians, it's difficult not to read, especially the proclamation that the one who will get all of this glory and power is the Son of Man, the one we recognize to be Jesus from our perspective. We see this Son of Man, this exemplar of all humanity, the best person who could ever be, and we see the perfect man, Jesus. We see nations rising up and oppressing, powers growing and diminishing, thrones rising up and being toppled, but we see the victorious Jesus at the end of all of it. We might be in the hands of those powers of the world right now, just like Daniel found himself. We might be in exile among the nations of the world. But someday, the court will sit, and the judgment will be handed down, and Jesus will be in control. That is the hope for us as believers, that whatever prophecy we read, God is always victorious, and those who are on his side will win. If you haven't joined with God's winning side, we offer that opportunity. You can come forward as we sing this invitation song.